Welcome in, everybody, to Grind Time, powered by Full-Time Fantasy and the FFWC. I am joined today by Dwain McFarland, the one and only, the at PFF analyst, the creator of the Utilization Report, co-host of the FF Hustle, and another high-stakes player with several top 5 finishes in multiple mass entry tournaments. Dwain, welcome to the show, buddy. How are you?
Oh man, I'm good. Thank you. That was too good of an intro, but I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. Hey, like I always say, like I love my favorite shows to do are coming on with other folks that I know draft a lot. I like high stakes. I'm not like a high stakes snob though. Like I just love being on shows with other people I know that have a lot of skin in the game. I think it just adds a whole different flavor, and I think folks dig it. Like they like hearing what people are actually where they're getting their skin in the game and why we're making the decisions we are. So I know you're super involved in the draft community as well. So excited to join you.
Yeah, I always say it's one thing for an analyst to say they would draft somebody or to tout somebody over another player. It's another thing to have that skin in the game and to actually select them time and time again over other players in that similar ADP range. That's why I like having like-minded people like yourself on that also like to draft and are taking, these drafts into consideration when we're looking at ADP and having other analysts on. So I really appreciate you coming on, talking about free agency today. Also, we'll discuss ADP with those free agents, where they're going, the fantasy impact of those free agent signings, and what it means for your fantasy team. So we're going to get started here in just a little bit, folks. Stick around.
Nothing but time, use it to grind. They huff and they puff it, this bacon is mine. Stakes are all high, your stakes are so dry. I'm as rare as they come, put it all on the line. Losing very doubtful, cause I'm winning every outcome. I'm impressed by his guess, there's no reason to guess. Drafting like I won the lotto, but it's grind every day. Managing teams is just part of the game. Free agents, lineups, they all in one place. This is the content that can't be replaced. Speaking of place, first is the option. Win is the goal and I do it real often. Tournament entries, I already bought them. I bury the field, that's the nail in the coffin. Checking my watch, checking my clock. Grind is the time, I ain't never gonna stop. Digital, analog, never gonna stop. You ain't never gonna stop, I ain't never gonna stop. Checking my watch, checking my clock. Grind is the time, I ain't never gonna stop. Digital, analog, never gonna stop. You ain't never gonna stop, I ain't never gonna stop. Cause it's grind time, let's go.
Man, I still get fired up with that intro. Just have only had it for a couple of weeks, but it's straight money. I love that thing. All right. Well, before we hop into football, I want to talk at the Fantasy Football Expo. I see that you're going to be heading to Canton this year. What days are you flying in? What days are you going to be staying?
I'll get in Friday because I'm going to play in the Football Guys poker tournament that Drew Davenport is putting on. So I'll be in that, and then we'll hang out Monday, and then I'll fly back on Sunday.
Yeah, I had every intention of playing in that tournament. I actually bought my slot, and then I was going over all my flights and my tickets and my days I was there, and then I realized, oh crap, I booked my first flight for my anniversary date. And so that's
a showstopper. Yeah. Can't do that. I don't blame you. You have a really good excuse.
Yeah. So I was like, nope. Looks like I'm flying on Friday now. So I went back through and adjusted all my flights, and now I'm landing Friday afternoon. So I will not be participating in the poker tournament, but I am a little sad about it, but I will be sitting next to my beautiful wife and having dinner the night before. So
yeah, you'll be in the better place.
Yeah. So we talked briefly before we started the show about drafting and about high stakes players and analysts getting involved into the draft games. Have you started drafting yet? What's your initial take on early ADP, if so, and what are you thinking with 2020 draft so far?
Yeah, I've done some best ball. I haven't done anything, really high stakes, at this point, but just trying to get my feet wet and spend a lot of time, honestly, looking at ADP and crafting what I think, my strategy should look like, at least at this point in the year. Things will change once the draft happens. So one thing that I looked at earlier in the year is really when do the big ADP moves occur, in the off season. What's cool is because we have so many drafts and best ball is an all year round thing. I was able to use FFPC data, look at the last 2 years, and really the biggest months where you have the most players jump at least 24 spots. I looked at it at 12 and up as well. But the 24 spot jumpers were all really happening in March, April, May, which makes sense, right? It's your free agency. Then you start getting tightening of mock drafts, free agency continues, and then you get the actual NFL draft. Then you get projection season, which is essentially every analyst going out there and saying, okay, here's the available workload. Now let's divvy it up to everyone.
Yep.
And so vacated targets, all those kind of things start playing in as people, start trying to, feed all these, passing attempts and targets to different players, things like that. So I think if you, if you go look at stuff that's done by Jack Miller over at Establish the Run, it talks about last year over in the Underdog tournament that really like the best teams were drafted at the very end of the year, right before football season started. I've always found that to be my best time as well, historically, like over years and years and years and years of drafting these things. And I think a lot of it comes back to, one, you've got the latest information, but also the competition starts to soften. Like if I draft tonight, Billy, I'm drafting with 10 U's. People are serious about this shit, when they're drafted tonight. So, I mean, as good as I may be, I also am smart enough to recognize that at this time of year, there's a lot of other people, smart people that are drafting. So having said all that, I think number one, looking at the things that we'll talk about it, free agency is a big part of it, but I think there's a real sweet spot, man, between round 7 and 10. That I think will stay pretty solid. I think players might move up and down a little bit in that range, but I don't see a ton of these players jumping out of that range, like into far earlier draft capital. There might be a few of them that it could occur for, but I think I always try to look at what is that sweet spot where I really feel comfortable about a large group of players, which positions are they at? Because then I really try to build, and in fact, I did an article last week. It's just a super straightforward, simple article I did over at PFF. It's actually not paywalled or anything. You guys can go read it. But I talk about this sweet spot for this year. And basically what it allows you to do is once you look and you see what all is there, like you could get your QB1 in that range easily. You can get your tight end 1 in that range. I think there's 4 guys you could still feel really comfortable about if you're drafting in a tight end premium even. And then I think, you see all your year 2 wide receivers, year 3 wide receivers, which are another group of players that moves up over the course of the offseason as far as ADP goes. And man, you could really, as long as you don't shoot yourself in the foot, like you could almost decide on any roster construction you want. So basically, as you're taking your early players based on what's fallen to you or who you like, you can easily then already be planning ahead. Like if you don't take a tight end in the first 3 rounds, honestly, I wouldn't take any of the ones in the middle. I'd rather draft Kyler Murray over Dalton Schultz, right? Give me the upside quarterback over the okay tight end. I'd rather have the guy that I think could throw for 5,000 and rush for 1,000 if everything went perfect. Everything goes perfect for Dalton Schultz. I think we may have already actually seen that season. It may have been last year. We don't know. It could be slightly better than that. But those are kind of things you can start to look at. And then you turn around the 8th or 9th round, you can grab Gronk, you can grab Albert O. I think there's a lot of other guys that you can look at. You can even grab Zach Ertz is probably going to do the same thing as Dalton Schultz. Yes, he's older, but they're the same style of tight end. So those are the sort of things that I start thinking through. And again, this year, I just think it's all about flexibility. Some years, it's like, man, I know I can get receivers in that range, or I know I feel really good about running backs in that range, but I may not feel good about another position. This year, right now anyway, again, ADP will shift some, but you can basically do anything you want there. So as you're drafting, just knowing, okay, I'm going to hold an 8th round pick for tight end. If I'm going to pound receivers, maybe grab a couple of running backs, and I'm going to take my quarterback, in the 7th, and or if you take Kyler Murray in the 5th or whatever. So anyway, that's kind of what I've been doing, really focusing on that. Obviously, a lot of free agency stuff I've looked at, the draft stuff as well.
Yeah, the free agency has definitely been impacting these draft boards. I usually start drafting actually right before the Super Bowl starts and just kind of, follow the trends as we get on. And you mentioned something that I just want to touch base on that, you had some of your best drafting as you near the beginning of the season. And I find that true when I look back and do my recap of the previous year. Around Super Bowl time, when I start doing my original drafts, I usually start kind of self-reflection of which was my better, month of drafting, where I was most successful at, where I had, the most profitability at. And it's a tool that I like to do as a drafter to help me identify any areas that I may need to, cut next year in order to become more profitable. And end of the year, so August, first week September, those weeks are always, like, I agree with you, some of the softer rooms we call it tour season, right? Everybody comes out and they hop into a room because they want to draft right before the season starts. That being said, I have found myself with a lot of success in early drafts because you're able to capitalize on some mispriced ADP players that are going much later than they should be, and before the field starts adjusting or realizing where where free agency might take it. It's kind of like you are anticipating certain players moving during free agency, certain players coming back, and you can take advantage of situations. You don't always win them all, but if you can win 60-70% of those, then by all means you're able to definitely become profitable in those early months of drafting as well.
I'm sharing my screen if you want to just I'll just show some folks some quick research here. It's split still. There we go. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and blow this up for folks. So if they're looking at it on YouTube, they can
there
see
we go.
it.
I couldn't find the right.
So this is just over the last 2 years. Let's see if I can get my. So this is 2020 and 2021, a summary of ADP movers, and so you can see here how many spots a player moved. And so this goes to what you were just talking about. So my thought process on this is if you want to draft and you're not going to be drafting, say you're going to draft all season long. When I say all season, maybe like you've already started, right? I've done a few, probably not near as many as you, but I do think you want to balance your portfolio in a way where you're drafting at the most advantageous times. And I do believe that if you want to be drafting and not just August and September, these are the months right now that I like the most. Things actually really kind of dry up between June, July, and August. We don't get a lot of these movers. And so, and that's not necessarily showing here. What this is showing is the types of players that move. So first part of analysis I want to do is look at when do we get the biggest jumps in ADP, which would hypothetically mean, okay, we should be drafting in those times to try to target those players that we know their ADP is going to go up because we want as much exposure as we can while the value's great, right, on the player. And so once I figured that out, it became, okay, well, what types of players are moving the most? And I mean, it makes perfect sense. Over here on the left, you get the total. The ADP change is like 12 to 24 spots, 25 to 36, and so on. People read. I don't have to give them that. But then you see the first thing is rookies. So rookies, you got 5 players in the last 2 years that have jumped 12 to 24 spots between February and August. So that makes up 18% of these large movers. Then you get second-year players. This one kind of surprised me, really, Billy. Like, I guess it doesn't surprise me thinking back, like anecdotally, to drafts and knowing what types of players move up. But it's kind of a market inefficiency that I can't explain because you would think really good players that care a lot about fantasy are drafting now. Why don't they already care about second-year receivers that we know that, like, especially receivers, running backs are included in this as well. But we know that those are the players that tend to get popular. And we also know that as people lean into zero RB and all these different macro strategies, and they're less worried about projections and things like that. We know those sort of, economics are like, they're impacting ADP as well. And so to me, it's kind of funny that this takes time to move up. It seems like right out of the gate, like the second and third year players would already be higher. But you can see 15% of the movers are made up by second year players, 7% by third year players. Free agents, which you just talked about, and we'll hit on here in a second, 17% of those movers. So like right now, if you're drafting, Rob Gronkowski still hasn't signed. And yeah, is there a chance he doesn't sign? Yeah, there is. We nobody knows for sure. We don't have a crystal ball. But man, if you're drafting right now and you can get Rob Gronkowski as tight end 13 to 15 off the board, you just need to do it. You got to gain some exposure. And you got to, if I'm going to draft at this point in the season, it's got to be wrapped around the axle of, okay, how am I going to be intentional about this? So one way to think about it, and I wrote an article last week before the one I just talked about, that was actually about here are the players I would be buying and fading right now at ADP. So players that I think you're probably getting the best price that you're going to get all offseason on. And then there's another group that these are the players that, you know what, you're probably spending the most you would spend right now. Javonte Williams is a great example. I love Javonte Williams. People have seen how much I love him.
It's ceiling right now.
I had him number 2 in my ranks, but to your point, he's at his ceiling in ADP. Even if they don't bring back Melvin Gordon, even if they don't draft a back in the first 2 or first 3 rounds, like Javonte Williams' ADP is not going to go much higher. He's round 1, pick 10 at FFPC right now. Like, yeah, he might go to pick 6. He might go to pick 7, pick 8. But once you get there, like you start looking at the names above him.
I've seen him go at 103.
Yeah, so it'll occasionally happen. But overall, you're still, and again, right now, early drafters, they're also bored. They're just trying to create as many different exposures as they can to these different things. So my point being is that there's certain guys, it doesn't mean I don't like them. It means that I just believe that the ADP is either going to stay the same or likely get better. And so I group those players into those 2 things. And it's really based on all this stuff. And then that last part, vacated opportunities, that all ties back to projection season. Once we know where everybody's going to land and all the chairs stop moving, free agency's over, the draft's over, and then we can all do our projections. And then you get a guy like Evan Silva, some of these really big names in the industry, and they start moving the needle on players, right? Billy, you and I were like hoping like maybe one day we'll move the needle like on some of these players, but it's all back to timing. So if you're going to draft right now, my advice is have a plan about why this is going to be different. What are the players you don't really want to bother with right now? And I think you should have a more strict list now than you will later. And then you should have the players that you want to gain exposure to. Kenneth Walker is another great one. Like his expected draft position is like 15 spots behind Breece Hall. Yeah, we don't think he's going to catch the ball as much. But the bottom line is when Kenneth Walker goes in the second round, like his ADP is going up. Like he's not going to be a 7th or 8th round pick anymore. It's just not.
Well, and you look at landing spots for both of them, right? And you look at the draft capital it's going to take for a team to acquire them. More than likely, Breece Hall goes ahead of them. So whether that's a late day 1 pick or an early day 2 pick, most likely early day 2, the landing spot may not be as favorable for Breece Hall as it would be for Kenneth Walker.
They could flip easily.
And we may see a similar trajectory that we saw with the JT and Clyde Edwards-Helaire rookie seasons, where JT was the most, dominant running back in the draft class. But as soon as Kansas City drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire, what happened? Those ADP swapped. And so I agree with you 100% here. You got to take a look at, and you hit the hammer on the nail. Something is taking exposures with players that creating something diverse or unique. In the beginning of drafting season, Tom Brady was going in like around 19 and 20. Gronk was going in 16, 17, 18s. Those are the times that you take advantage of those type of stacks and those type of plays, and you can differentiate yourself from the rest of the field who are now taking those players, between, round 6 through 9 for for Brady and, rounds 12, 13 or lower for Gronkowski. You're going to create some unique teams and really separate yourself from the pack, especially in tournament play, because you were able to capitalize on such great ADP to begin with. That's why I like drafting early. That's why I like, taking chances and those kind of things. That's how you win big tournaments. That's how you cash out these things, is by taking risks and separating yourself from the rest of the pack. Anyone can wait until everything settles, and then they can they can just follow. I forget that game where you just kind of you go dot to dot and you draw things, right? That's what that's what I like.
Or
call
color
August
by numbers. Color by numbers. Yeah.
Exactly. That's like August drafting to me, right?
Man.
That's like August, September drafting to me. Like that's why I really like early drafting, because you can kind of piece those things together before the puzzle's actually there, and you can really create yourself some unique teams. Well,
yeah, dude, I'm totally with you on that.
Well, I like this a lot. I'm gonna move now so we can hop into some free agency here. So free agent signings. Let's start with some running backs. I'm a running back guy. You'll find me a couple 0 running back teams, but I'm always drafting me some running backs. Ronald Jones signs a 1-year deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, $1.5 million with $750,000 guaranteed. What does this do for you with this Kansas City backfield? I've seen some difference of opinions where I've seen some are moving, Clyde Edwards-Helaire down their rankings and have slid down draft boards. I've also seen some that are saying, hey, it just kind of reaffirms his role in the passing game, and they move him up their rankings. So where do you stand with this backfield, and how does it affect you in your draft boards?
Yeah, so there's two things here. First, let's just talk about Ronald Jones. Like he is he's a pretty explosive player as far as on the ground. Like we all know, like sorry, Ronald, love you, but you're a sieve in the passing game. Like, Ian, Harditz, who I do a podcast with pretty much like every day over PFF, like the thing he always points to, and it just cracks me up because it's true. I saw this play with Ronald Jones. He's so bad at receiving. He actually caught a touchdown pass from Brady last season, fell down. The ref called it incomplete, and he just got up and he thought, yeah, well, I probably dropped it. Most people get up and be like, what? I caught it. Ronald Jones just walks back to the huddle. He's like, yeah, I probably dropped it. So he's not going to be involved in the passing game. So I get where people are going, with the Clyde Edwards-Helaire thing. But for me, I think it just really spells, a split backfield. My biggest thing is really Clyde Edwards-Helaire himself. When you look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's just not done what we thought he was going to do. Let's just be honest about it. It is what it is at this point. His rushes.
He's still only 24, though.
I get it, but usually by
young.
now these guys, if these underlying metrics are, I agree, he's young, but the missed tackles forced, 13%, last year. The average, player in the league, 17%. Now he's battled injuries both seasons, mind you. He's had some ankle and knee issues along the way. So that could definitely be something that you got to factor in for. But then the big thing with the passing game that I struggle with, I agree, Ronald Jones isn't going to be involved there, but I don't know how involved Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to be either. 12% targets per route run last year. Like a really good running back gets up over 20%. Leonard Fournette, for example, has been over 20% every year of his career. Clyde Edwards-Helaire hasn't broken 20% yet in his 2 years. He had a 17% his rookie season, 12% last year. Look at his yards per route run, both terrible, 1.04, 0.72. The one thing kind of encouraging like about Edwards-Helaire, I really like to look for running backs that have an ADOT that's really above 0, because typically it's just a more sticky stat. And his first year he did have that as a 1.1, but last year again he became more of a swing pass guy. So when I look at Edwards-Helaire, I do think he's the lead back right now for the Chiefs, Billy. I think there's pluses that come with that. You're playing with Patrick Mahomes. You should be playing with a good offense, probably going to take a little bit of a step back, but there's a lot of opportunity to score touchdowns in the offense. My concern, though, is Edwards-Helaire was getting those carries down inside the 5 quite often. He was getting a lot of the early down work. Now, if Ronald Jones takes that over and maybe we get Clyde Edwards-Helaire on the field more on passing downs, I think there's also a case to be made, well, that could be worse because Mahomes doesn't throw it to the backs. And if you're not out there to score the touchdowns, then where does that leave him? So he's kind of a player. I want to have exposure to him, but I'm not going to go crazy with it, if that makes sense, because he hasn't shown enough to me himself is the biggest reason.
So that is the departure of Tyreek Hill in the screen games and the flat game. Does that not open up the window for a running back in this passing game? Because I'm looking at this offense, and I've been saying this for a few weeks now when I was joining Pat Forrest on his show as well. And this was something that I just think the Chiefs are going to have a very new look offense here in 2022. You got rid of one of the most, exhilarating wide receivers in the NFL, the most dynamic receivers in the NFL that was, running a lot of the slot, a lot in the screens, and was, creating a lot of yards after the catch. What happens to that part of that game? They bring in Juju, who's going to, man the slot. They bring in MVS, who's going to stretch the field. Well, what's going to happen now? None of those receivers really excel in the screen game. Juju can do it, but he doesn't excel in it. So do you think that goes to the running back here in 2022, or do you think that this is something that they're just going to, move out of the system?
I think that's what you're hoping for. The problem is screen passes just don't, in the end of the day, they don't account for a ton. They account for very little of a player's target share, even running backs. Like, even if you look at some of the top ones, it's 10% of their targets come on screen. So I do think Edwards-Helaire could pick up, a little bit in that space. And we know that Andy Reid's shown in the past to be, he can run a screen game. He knows how to get his team ready to do it. The Cowboys can't do it to save their lives. They have no clue. And they haven't known how for a long time. It's kind of funny. It doesn't matter who the coach is. But when you look at, Andy Reid, it's something he's been good at. So I think that's the thing you're kind of hoping for. And the good thing with Edwards-Helaire right now is his ADP's cheap. What I'm looking at right now, the FFPC, is you can get him in the 6th, 7th round. So it's fine. If you want to take a shot on Edwards-Helaire in that range, I think it's fine to get some exposure. My other challenge for him, though, is he really works in this, even whether you call it a screen or whatever, you're getting a condensed field now, and really you got Juju working underneath. You're going to have Kelsey working underneath and intermediate, and now you got a running back working underneath. And that doesn't really fit Pat Mahomes and what he wants to do. Now he's adapted.
It does in 2021 when they were getting shut down by cover 2, right? They couldn't throw deep or down the field as much. They seemed to be.
Yeah, but his ADOT didn't tumble. They just decided to attack the defense with deeper crossers, different things like that, instead of all the vertical routes. We'll see what happens in 2022. My guess is it's not going to matter. They're going to draft a receiver with one of their first
probably
2 picks in the first round. So I think there's a chance, to your point, for Edwards-Helaire to grow his passing role. We definitely think that it won't be Ronald Jones. Here's my biggest thing, Billy. Come on, man. You couldn't beat out Darrell Williams. You couldn't beat out Jerick McKinnon. You can't earn this backfield from those 2 dudes. Ronald Jones better than both those players. I think I struggle.
It's going to be interesting to see how this breaks out. I think it's going to be closer to 50-50 than some are anticipating. I give Edwards-Helaire the slight tip of the hat, but it could go either way.
So do you like Rojo right now? He's around 10, 11.
I have same with you. I don't have a lot of exposure. You have some just to have it, but I don't really trust anyone in this backfield right now currently. I'll take a discount whoever's where.
The Rojo thing that would be interesting, is if all of a sudden he was forced into. He's probably never going to get the passing down work, but if he was ever got to a spot, because we saw this with Edwards-Helaire, is when he would get 60 to 65% of the carries, even if he didn't get the passing work in a week, it was money. So I think The thing that you're getting with Ronald Jones is, if Edwards-Helaire is hurt for 3 or 4 games, you probably have a really high-end RB2 for those weeks, depending on how it plays out.
I would agree. It's kind of go back to that 2020, year where he just under 1,000 yards. He was averaging a little over 5 yards a touch. He actually looked pretty good. That was the year they were going to get rid of Fournette before the injury. So I think this backfield will be pretty split. I think that's why we're seeing the discount on both these players, but it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out through camp. Next running back, I want to talk about Marlon Mack, 2020 Achilles injury, joins Texas on a 1-year, $2 million deal. They also, signed Royce Freeman. They also signed Dario Ogunbowale. How are you breaking down this backfield?
They still have Rex Burkhead too, man.
They still have Rex Burkhead. That's right. How are you breaking down this backfield? Are you avoiding it at all costs? I've actually been drafting Marlon Mack, to be honest, and I've kind of been drafting him in that round 13, 14 range. I've been seeing, other backs go in and just as a dart, throwing a flyer. I had some early shares in round 20 as some gambles that looking like it could pay off at the time being. But what are your thoughts on this backfield? Are you just avoiding it altogether?
Man, I'm mostly avoiding it. But the ADP is so cheap. Like if you want to take, like to your point, you want to take some flyers on it, I think it's fine. Marlon Mack most likely is going to profile as the early down guy,
I think so too.
And he could share that. So, Ogunbowale and Rex Burkhead are really more all-round / receiving options. Royce Freeman, I think Marlon Mack is better than he is. So
and isn't this backfield so sexy?
Yeah, sexy Rexy. But yeah, my thought is that I can't. We'll see what they do in the draft, but if you force me to project their backfield right now, I would say Marlon Mack is going to. I think it's going to be nasty. There's going to be a lot of guys playing, but I would project Marlon Mack to be the lead early down back. How much that's going to be worth on a really crappy offense like Houston, that's the problem. Early down backs on crappy offenses aren't really worth much. On those kind of offense, you really want the receiving down back. So I'll have some exposure if the Texans were to come out and somehow surprise, and play better, which they did in a few games last season. They gave some people a run for their money that we didn't think they would. Matt could come in some of those games. Definitely like him better in best ball. I probably won't be pulling the trigger on him in redraft at all because I'll struggle to figure out how I'm ever going to put him in a lineup, even if I think he's starting.
Yeah, I would like to just reiterate that best ball is where I've been taking him. I would not. I would not. Keep that. Yeah. I do not want to try to hit the start button on a week with him. It's a whole nother thing to actually put him in your lineup.
It's like the opposite sides of magnets. Your mouse just keeps gliding over him.
Yeah,
no, won't let me pick him.
I can't do that. I just can't do it. Leonard Fournette, Lombardi Lenny staying with the Bucs, 3 years, $21 million. What does this do for Vaughn? They also re-signed Giovanni Bernard. What does this backfield play out to you? We all pretty much know Fournette's going to be the lead dog here, but who is the running back 2 in this offense? Are you leaning Gio or are you leaning Vaughn?
I'm leaning Vaughn. I think we saw it with Gio last year, right? He had a little bit of the passing down role, but really Lenny just kind of wrestled that away from him at the end of the year.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it is Vaughn, but I am expecting the Bucs to draft a back. They have sniffed around several of these backs in their top 30 visits, virtual visits, combine visits, and then they've had an eye on a few guys even in free agency. So I think this is going to be a situation where we could see maybe a 3rd round or 4th round pick spent on running back. So I think it's one that we'll have to wait and see. What's going to ultimately occur. Now, Keyshawn, his ADP isn't bad. So if you still want some exposure and you want to do it right now, it's fine. I don't think it's critical. Even if they don't draft another back, his ADP is probably not going to move a lot from where it's at today. I guess it could some. They won't probably get too expensive. I think the bigger thing, though, is if they don't draft a back and people are now for sure about it, Fournette's going to rise, right now going beginning of round 4, end of round 3. He'll probably rise another half to full round. I don't know that he'll get in the second round.
He's creeping second to third turn right now.
Yeah. So, at FFPC, right now, he's not quite there. But yeah, it won't surprise me. If he sneaks up into the second round, all these macro strategies like zero RB and all those things, those also have impact, right, on the way these drafts go. So I don't know that we'll see as many 27-year-old backs make it into the second rounds as we used to. But I'm fine with Fournette, man. He's well under the 1,500 carry mark that I care about a lot. You know, the Bucs paid him. He showed he can be an every down back. And a stat that really surprised me, 20% targets per route run every single year he's been in the league. He's a much better player in the receiving game than we ever thought. And that goes back to Jacksonville. They just didn't use him that way. And now you got a quarterback like Brady that will do it. So, yeah, man, top 5 offense, a back that's probably going to be on the field 65 to 70% of the plays, former first-round pick. Like, there's not a lot that you can't like about Fournette.
Next up, Chase Edmonds joins the Dolphins here with another, muddied backfield with Raheem Mostert, Gaskins. They do have the creative McDaniels now, who left my 49ers and joined them. This team seems to have a lot of speed now. I think it's one of the fastest, if not the fastest team in the NFL, having Tyreek Hill, having Waddle, having Raheem Mostert, add in Edmonds' dynamic abilities as well. What's your take on Edmonds in Miami, and are you buying it as current ADP?
Yeah, so I don't know where he's at over at FFWC, but right now he's been going in the 9th round in the drafts that I'm doing. So absolutely, a guy that I think it's going to be a committee. We've seen that, in this 49ers offense. We've also seen him commit to someone before, so it can happen. The beauty with Edmonds, I think he does a couple things that McDaniel really likes and why he went and targeted him and gave him relatively nice money for a running back, even though it's not as huge as what we used to think of for backs. But his explosive play rate, which is carries of 10 yards or more, 16%. One of the top guys in the league last year. The average explosive play rate over the last 3 years for running backs in the NFL is 10.5%. So he's well above that. They did add Raheem Mostert, but it was a 1-year deal. And even if you look at the presser, it's basically Mostert even saying himself, yeah, McDaniel basically told me, like, calm down. It's not going to be like this huge role like I might have started to be in line for, 2 seasons ago in San Francisco. So I do think, you'll see Mostert probably get maybe 30-35% of the carries, maybe, and you'll have maybe Gaskin or somebody else is involved for 10 to 15% of the snaps. But I think Edmonds will be right around 50%, man. And I think with his ability to make the big play, and then I think the other thing they really liked about him is his ability in the receiving game. So he's had a limited role for multiple years, but that's where these targets per route run type stats come in really helpful. 20%, 19%, 21%, and 20%. So he's been a 20% targets per route run guy. Are they going to want to throw the ball a ton to the backs when you have Tyreek Hill, you have Jalen Waddle, even you got Mike Gesicki? Probably not, but he'll be involved enough that I think he can definitely provide value where he's going right now.
Yeah, FFWC, earliest I've seen him go now is at 803. He's on average going at
That's still a good deal.
At like the 9.9 to like 9.12 range, and I'm buying all day at that price as well. He's already one of my most owned running backs.
And the Dolphins are sorry, they're pretty tapped. Like, as far, they don't have a lot of draft capital, so it's not very likely that they're going to add a back in the draft.
Well, and it's great because, like, in early drafts, like before he was signed, he was going in around 12, 13 in some of these drafts, which to me, there wasn't a scenario where I said, okay, he's going to sign with X team and his ADP is going to drop, right? Like, to me, that was the discount was already baked in, capitalize on the discount, take as much as you can around 12, 13, regardless of where he signs, that ADP is probably going to rise. And that's what I was doing early in drafts. And now that he's starting to get an 8, 9, 10, now I'm starting to see my exposure in other players in that area because I already have so much rounds 12 and 13 baked in. So another benefit of drafting early is, setting up yourself up for those. Cordero Patterson rejoins the Falcons, 2 years, $10.5 million. What are the Falcons doing? It's this team. Like, this is arguably going to be one of the worst teams, if not the worst team in the NFL. I was talking with a guy on Twitter today, and I said he was talking about how the New England Patriots had the worst receiving core, and I said, oh, the Falcons are saying hello because I'm not sure that their starting wide receiver would make a 53-man roster in a lot of these other NFL teams. What's your take on the Falcons and Cordell Patterson? Are they going to be using him more as a wide back and used in the slot like we saw, or used in the passing game more this year? Because it seems like as soon as they started running him more, he kind of shut down last year and his body broke down and he started to, that's where his numbers really tapered off. So what's your take on Patterson re-signing with the Falcons?
Yeah, I really like Patterson. He's another player at ADP that I'm absolutely targeting. I know he's 32 years old, but the guy doesn't have, 1,500 carries on his body. Like, he just doesn't. Like, he's hardly played, really, if you look at his stats. So, yeah, I think he'll be used in a similar fashion. I don't think they want to overextend his role too much, but just by the nature of necessity, Like there's a chance for him to see more targets than what he saw last year, to line up more out wide, to your point. I mean, they lost Russell Gage to Tampa Bay. Calvin Ridley's out due to gambling. I mean, so basically you've got Kyle Pitts and Cordell Patterson right now. To your point, the other guys, Frank Darby, Olamide Zaccheaus,
Auden Tate.
Christian Blake, Auden Tate. Auden Tate, nice contested ball player. Like he could do a little bit, but like he's not going to demand a ton. Sorry, Ian love Auden Tate stand. So yeah, I think Patterson has a chance to be the number 2 target in the offense behind Kyle Pitts and still be involved in the running game. And I think people forget, man, Patterson, like he tanked after the high ankle sprain. And people forget it because he tried to play through it. He came back like a week early from it and played and actually had a good game that week. And so when people see that, they just assume that
I benched him for what that's worth.
I did too. I did too. And then I put him back in afterwards and he sucked because he was hurt. So look, the way these players respond to injury, the way they re-aggravate things, it's not always in the news. For all we know, they brought him back too early, which looking at a high ankle sprain, they did. And then they just didn't say anything about it when he retweeted it in the game. That's the bottom line. That is what happened with Cordell Patterson because everything perfectly coincides with that, the drop-off, because he'd been very explosive before that. And they've been moving him all around. They tried to do some of those things later in the season, but to your point, really became more of a decoy there at the end than anything. And when he was getting it, it just wasn't as efficient. So assuming he can stay healthy, another player, man, if you can get him in the 8th and 9th round, especially in PPR, like in standard, don't like him as much, but he, even despite his age, right? Despite the age, he gives you the explosive plays and he gives you the involvement in the receiving game. And man, that can be your RB2 easy. If you want to go heavy on receivers and you got a couple of guys, like if you had him and Chase Edmonds, again, if you look at that sweet spot, round 7 to 10 this year, you could take one back early, pound receivers, do whatever your strategy you want to be.
You're a running back.
Get to those rounds and you could take Chase Edmonds and Cordell Patterson, and then do a couple of other things. And you probably got an RB2 as long as you grabbed an RB1 up top. Like you got to get one kind of anchor player.
Sounds like a lot of my rosters already.
Yeah, that was my strategy mostly last year. The thing you have to have, man, is discipline, because once you get to those rounds, you're kind of wondering, do I want to click on Cordell Patterson when I could click on Rondell Moore, when I could click on Rashad Bateman, when I could click on Chase Claypool, when I could click on Treylon Burks, when I could click on Drake London, because all those rookies and second-year receivers are all going in that range too. So when you build your roster that way, you got to be disciplined, because I've already done it where I got down there. I'm like, man, I really want to take Rondell Moore. I really want to take this other
shiny
player.
ball syndrome.
Yes.
So
I don't know, shiny ball, man. What are we talking about? Shiny toy I've heard of, but
the year's 2022. We're talking about Cordell Patterson. The year's 2022. We're talking about Cordell Patterson being a decoy. This is awesome. Let's move on. So we've moved from a wide back. Let's move to wide receiver. MVS joins Kansas City here. We talked about him briefly earlier. 3 years, $30 million. Never in my life would I have thought someone would have paid MVS $10 million a year, but here we are. Also, Juju joins for 1 year, $3.25 million. How are you breaking down them inside this offense? Who do you like more in drafts? Keeping in mind Juju is going ahead of MVS by multiple rounds. FFWC, Juju is going, where'd he go?
He's going in the 6 over an FFPC right now.
Yeah, FFWC 3 wide receiver start is going a little earlier, but we have what's your take on these wide receivers, and who are you comfortable taking right now in drafts?
Yeah, so we'll start with MVS. I was also surprised to see him get that much. And then before I get into either one of them, I think if you're drafting right now, you just don't draft them. Why? Because the Chiefs are probably spending one of their first first round picks, which they've got 2 at the end of the first round, on a receiver. And when that happens, regardless of whether that receiver is going to be on the field or they suck or whatever, it's going to move their ADP down. There's no way I'm drafting Juju right now in round 5 or round 6. I just think you're probably buying him at the highest ADP that he's going to be all off season once the draft gets here. And so when I look at Juju, the other problem that I have is, look, as much as I love him and he's still a young player, his underlying data points have just not been good. He had his 1 year, and yes, I know he had another year where he was in the top 24 receivers, and look, at the end of the day, all we really care about, right, is fantasy points. But when I look at the way his efficiency fell off, so for example, if you look at his yards per route run, rookie 2.17, his breakout year 2018 2.8, down to 1.49, down to 1.29, down to 0.88. Juju is just not a big playmaker. And so, yeah, could he get peppered with some targets? It could happen. But even his targets per route run have never been great. His only season to get over 20% was in 2018 when he hit 24%. Otherwise, it's been 18%, 18%, 19%, 17%. That's a complimentary player. Now, the advantage you're getting is you're going to be in a pass-heavy offense. The Chiefs pass. They like to pass over the NFL expectation in any type of game script. Leading, close, trailing, doesn't matter. But their overall play volume is not huge. They do not run a ton of plays. Their play volume overall is average, but they lean to the pass. So that's the positive for Juju. With MVS, really similar. Targets per route run have never been great, but he's a field stretcher, right? He's an air yards guy. So he's going to come up with some big games for you with Pat Mahomes. Like undoubtedly, like that's going to happen, especially if defenses start to evolve to their new offense that could be changing like you're talking about. And all of a sudden you see more cover one stuff and you get more shots downfield. That's where I think MVS is going to come through. But, I mean, who are we fooling? MVS has been playing with Aaron Rodgers his whole career. It's not like this is his first great quarterback. Like he's already had a good quarterback. And so
that was
I like
the point
MVS.
I made on a show the other day was like he leaves the double like back-to-back MVP, goes to the Chiefs. It's not like he came from some bum. Like he came from another elite quarterback. Like I don't see why he's going so much higher in draft simply because he went from Green Bay to the Chiefs. It's just from a return on investment standpoint in the draft room, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, what I would say, like for a player like MVS, let's assume the Chiefs don't. They're going to draft a receiver. Let's say they don't, okay? And we get to a little further along here in draft season. If you want to take MVS, I'm fine, but you don't take him ahead of any of the rookies. You don't take him over any of the potential second-year breakout guys. You don't take it over any of the potential third-year breakout or third-year rebound guys. You don't take him over any of those. Once you get past like those archetypes, and you feel like you want to take a swing, fine. But just make sure, don't push him ahead of those types of players. There's a chance that he could all of a sudden break out because weird shit happens. Like it happens all the time. Like we do the best we can with the data that we have. And I think we do a pretty good job. Like if you correlate, fantasy rankings at a lot of sites and, you did the Fantasy Pro stuff, 2 fantasy points, even on a season, like, for PFF, like I want to say we were like near a 70% correlation between rankings and fantasy points. That's like really good. Like when you think about what correlation means, but at the end of the day, like there are still players that like sneak through, that don't meet any of the metrics we want and all of a sudden break out. It's not often, but if I were to take a swing on a guy, I would want to take a swing on a guy that I think could be in an offense that really needs him. It could be better. It could be it might be an improved opportunity for him. We don't know. So, I mean, I would be fine with it, but I just wouldn't take him ahead of any of those other types of players.
Speaking of an offense who really needs a guy, DJ Chark joins the Lions 1 year, $10 million deal. Where does this move DJ Chark in your rankings, and are you comfortable drafting him in early drafts?
I'll tell you one thing. Number one, it does not move the needle at all for me on Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like I feel still absolutely fine about Amon-Ra St. Brown. Chark is an interesting player though, because he's definitely flashed. So some of these other guys we've talked about so far, they've never flashed the things that he has actually, come through and done. So former second round pick, 61 overall in 2018. He has never gotten to the 2 yards per route run, which is really where we want to get to, but he's been up in the 1.7 range. Targets per route run, kind of similar really to MVS. He's more of a deep ball guy. Going to see 16, 18% targets per route run. He could make that potentially move up a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's like, man, it's Jared Goff. He doesn't want to push the ball down the field a ton. The Lions, yeah, they should be a little better, but they'll probably be in plenty of trailing scripts and things like that. So that could work into Chark's advantage. But at the end of the day, I just feel like really the offense right now is going to run through Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson, and probably the backs. And they also have 2 picks, and they have 3 picks inside the top 35. So we could see them easily spin a pick, on a skill position as well. So with Chark, I really think of him more as, an air yard guy that you're going to hope you hit a couple
number
of
19 in 2020.
Yeah. And so I think he could. He's a guy that could be more than that. I wish he would have landed somewhere that I just liked his fit with the quarterback better. Like if he would have landed with, man, I would much rather see DJ Chark with Patrick Mahomes than Marquise Valdes-Scantling. Like that would have got money. That would have got me more excited. Yeah, it would have saved him money too.
Allen Robinson lands with the Rams, 3 years, $46.5 million. Where are you with Robinson now that he actually has a quarterback for the first time in his career? He's been you name it. He's had every shitty quarterback in the world throwing him the ball. He finally has a quarterback. What does this do for you in your rankings?
Yeah, it definitely moved A-Rob up. Like A-Rob's kind of polarizing because you have to wonder, did he hit the cliff last year, or was it just injuries and he was just so fed up? Look, we've all been in a role somewhere in our life where we're just like, you know what, I'm ready just to be in my next thing.
Yep.
You stay dedicated, you do what you got to do to get through. But these guys are going out there putting their body on the line. I know they get paid money, but most people that listen to these, they have no clue what it means to get hit in the NFL, and to go through what these guys go through on a weekly grind and what all that means. So I'm kind of in the middle on him, but I definitely want exposure to Allen Robinson. We know that Cooper Kupp's really the alpha. Like, we don't see that changing. He's probably still going to be a 30% target share guy. But man, if Allen Robinson could get somewhere between 22 and 24% of the targets from Matt Stafford, that could still equal his best season ever. And he's had some really good seasons. I'm not thinking he's going to be a top 10 receiver like he's done in the past, but I think it's in the range of outcomes that he could live on some hyper efficiency. I don't think it's anything where we think he's going to get 150 targets, but he could see 125 targets, and they could be really, they could be the best 125 targets he's seen in his life. All of them, all 125 of them could equal landing in the top targets he's ever seen in his career. So right now, I've got him at wide receiver 29 in a PPR setup. So he's really in my mid-range wide receiver 3, but I think he has upside to be a wide receiver 2.
Okay. Yeah, he's going FFW. I agree. FFWC, he's going as like wide receiver 23 to 27 in that range. So in the same ballpark. He's going, around the area of like Judy, Elijah Moore, St. Brown, all that kind of same tier for me. I think he definitely has the ability to outperform that in this offense. I'm curious what they do with Van Jefferson, right? Who had flashed last year as well. The departure of Bob Woods definitely opened things up. I definitely want to see what happens with Odell as well. I've been kind of drafting some exposure to Robinson, but this thing could also change drastically if there's some with some free agents time, and the Rams always trade away the draft pick. So we'll get someone later in drafts.
Yeah, I think with Beckham, it's just a matter of is anybody else going to make an offer, right? And can the Rams make it work?
They may get a cheap, like a cheap comeback offer. I think so too. And then next thing you know, he starts in the pup and he comes back down the stretch. And when you're relying on someone like Allen Robinson, when you're most needing him, now you have another, receiver in the mix that's going to demand a target share. And that's my only concern with Robinson here in 2020.
Yeah, those are the other factors that just kind of have me a little below consensus on him, but having to still make the caveat that I want my exposure, right?
Exactly.
Because of the improvement I think you're going to see. I do think there's a chance that Robinson comes back, that Robinson, even if they add OBJ and he's having to try to slowly come back, and maybe they get him out late October or November, like there's no guarantee OBJ is even ready. Like Van Jefferson, really, like right now, the best I can tell, they just want to use him as a field stretcher.
I think so too.
That's what it looks like anyway. They could change, but that's really the role that they've used him in. And with Robinson, the big thing last year, was by far his worst yards per route run of his career, 1.13. He's normally, up closer to 2. And so that's the other question. Did he really fall off, or was it just an injury thing? And then the questions there's enough there that I want to be below consensus, but again, I want to get exposure. I
think it was motivation. I think you hit the hammer on the nail in the beginning. It was just, he's checked out, right? He was sick of Matt Nagy, sick of the offense, sick of the role. It's just kind of done, exactly. And you look back, like you talked about the efficiency. And I think that's the other key here, because we saw, I'm not even going to look at last year's stats. I'm just kind of throw that one out the window for me. Like 2019, 2020, 154, 151 targets. He's like 63, 64%, in terms of his catches. He's, 98, 102 there for those 2 years. If you have a more efficient quarterback like Stafford, I agree with you. 125, even 110 targets, he's probably going to have similar stats to those years, just based upon the efficiency and the offense itself. Like, he's not going to be the number one anymore. It doesn't have to be, at least. Like, Cooper Kupp is there to help alleviate the defense and avoid, and avoid double coverage. So I really like the landing spot for him. I think it was a good landing spot. I think that we're going to see a bounce back year, but I do have concerns about them getting, Odell Beckham at cheap and affecting his efficiency down the stretch.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Let's jump here to Christian Kirk, who just stole $72 million from Jacksonville on a 4-year deal. What's your take on Kirk here?
I think the biggest thought, for me is like, man, if he gets to play in the slot, I like him a lot more. When he's had to play outside in his career, it's been okay. He can play out there, but it's not really been good. Really, his best performances come when he gets to work inside. So if they don't get rid of Laviska Shenault, like, we're just not going to know. Like, they could mix these guys in. He could play outside. He could play inside some. And so if I find that they keep Laviska Shenault and there's any chance that Chenault's going to hold down that slot role, that's definitely going to move Kirk down my board. Like, he's been fine. I'm with you. I can't believe he got the money he's gotten, so even in a limited role, targets per route run, which kind of eliminates the limited role. It's like, okay, when he was out there, how often was he targeted? 19%, 20%, 14%, 19%. So a step ahead of your MVSs, your Charks, some of these other guys. But at the end of the day, like, I just don't know that Christian Kirk's ever going to turn into like this 22, 25% target share guy, which is what I think you kind of need with him in Jacksonville. Now, I mean, his ADP, like, I don't have it up right in front of me, but it wasn't terrible, like, as of just like, last week, like I'm looking right now. You can look at it too. Christian Kirk, he's going off wide receiver 48. He's going around 9 to 10. So, I mean, I'm fine with him, at that range. But again, like, you're looking at Rondale Moore, Rashad Bateman, Chase Claypool, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, other players that have shown more or have potentially more upside or unknown that we just want to buy into the unknown, right? Because I feel like we kind of know what Christian Kirk is. So I'm fine with Kirk. I like him as a wide receiver 4 with a chance to grow into being a wide receiver 3. He's a good player. He's just not a great player, and I worry about the offense.
This next group, we're going to move the tight ends. This is actually, I really like the signings this year for the tight ends. Like, Hayden Hurst joins the Bengals on a 1-year deal to replace CJ Uzomah. This signing was sneaky good. Like, Hayden Hurst was actually, people forget he was a first-round draft pick. He's been misused in his career. I'm pretty excited about this signing. I think it's a great landing spot for him to kind of, rejuvenate his career. What's your take on Hurst, the Bengals?
Yeah, I think he can easily come in and fill the CJ Uzomah role. I mean, you're going to be the 4th option. Obviously, it's Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. But, like, when defenses are having to worry about all of that, the targets you do get, like, and we saw it last year with Uzomah, a player that we knew had an athletic profile, never had necessarily seen it show up as that much in a game. And last year, like, you gave him a little bit of space because they were worried about everybody else, and all of a sudden he'd score a long touchdown. I don't know that Hayden Hurst has that same kind of athleticism, but I do think he's the kind of guy that can get lost in the shuffle. Like him way better in best ball than I would in redraft. In redraft, I'm gonna have a hard time figuring out which week to start him. But having him down there is my tight end, 2, tight end 3. Yep, if exactly. I go 3 tight ends on a best ball team, I like Hayden Hurst because you're buying into the Bengals offense. Like, you're buying in an offense that we hope they actually just let Joe Burrow do his thing this year, throw the ball more, not be so conservative, which is we saw him get better about. Like, as they went down towards the end of last year, that last month and a half, we saw the Bengals really not quite get to where we wanted to, but definitely more pass heavy than what we had seen earlier in the year.
Ricky Seals-Jones joins New York Giants to replace Evan Ingram here. It's funny because a lot of sites still have him listed as Washington on the draft board, and he's going undrafted. And some sites he's starting to become He's starting to be drafted now in drafts, but round 20 was kind of the spot for a long time. He's starting to sneak up to rounds 18, 17 now. What's your take on RSJ, and are you comfortable with him as your tight end 2?
I mean, I would take him as a tight end 2. I would rather him be a tight end 3. I'm not that excited about him. I feel like when I look at the Giants offense, like, number one, it's an offense I have a lot of questions about, but I'm excited. They have a new offensive coordinator. It cannot be worse than what we saw with Jason Garrett, right? And Joe Judge. Like, it can't be worse. So you've got a floor in place that it can't be that bad. Seals-Jones, though, I mean, we're talking about a player that's going into year 6, in his career, going to be 27 and a half years old when the season starts. I feel like we kind of know what he is. I think he'll be fine. He's going to come through on some weeks. But again, that's where you're drafting him, where you're getting him. Like, is you're just saying, hey, is this a player that can be on the field that might get a 15% target share? And if that's what you're looking for, then I think that's fine for Ricky Seals-Jones, which that's pretty much what people are saying with how late he's being drafted. It's not like people are getting carried away with him.
Yeah, I'm going to say like somewhere between like 35 and 50 targets, maybe, if you're lucky, right? And
yeah, I think that would be 50 would be great. Like,
yeah,
50 targets, catch 40 balls, 400 or 500 yards, catch 4 or 5 touchdowns, like, would be a big season for Ricky Seals-Jones. And it would be usable in best ball.
Exactly. And I think, as the tight end one there, I think it's a real possibility for him to hit those numbers. So best ball, he's been a target for me in these early drafts. Uzoma joins the Jets, 3 years, $24 million after a career best 49 catches, 493 yards, and 5 touchdown stat line last year. What's your take on Uzoma and his presence now with the Jets?
Would have liked it a lot better, had they not added another, tight end and Tyler Conklin. So, when we get into these situations where you got two guys like this and then they rotate, it's a pain in the ass, man. Especially on an offense that I don't think is going to be that good. Zach Wilson's still got to show us, like, can he be an NFL quarterback? I do think they'll try to run the ball more. And we're seeing that. They're trying to build their team to be a more physical team that can run 12 personnel, which these two tight ends will give them the capability to do. That's something that the Jets really couldn't do last year. And they didn't have a fullback either. So they couldn't. You remember, this is an offense that's really molded after the 49ers, but we didn't get to see that side of the offense. So with Uzoma, like in this kind of scheme, there's going to be potential for spike weeks, but I think if you had to put him in the pecking order, you're going to say Elijah Moore is the number 1 right now. Number 2 right now would be Corey Davis. If they go 3 wide, I would say Braxton Berrios and he are probably vying, and Michael Carter. Those 3 are probably all kind of sharing who's going to be next behind those 2 other guys. But the other problem for Uzoma is really that the Jets have been linked to multiple wide receivers in the draft. Yep. They looked at Tyreek Hill. They were in on that deal. So I have a feeling trying to get Debo. So I have a feeling they're adding another receiver. And so once that happens, like, I just feel like once you become like the 3rd in the pecking order on what we hope might be an average offense, like would probably be the best that we're hoping for, I think that just becomes tough.
Yep, I'd agree with you there. I've been avoiding him in drafts. It's just bad offense, bad scenario, a lot of mouths to feed in an area that just doesn't have the talent to feed them. So I agree with you. I've been avoiding Uzoma in drafts. Gerald Everett joins Justin Herbert here on a 2-year, $12 million contract. I liked this signing. I felt like this was a weak area for them last year, tight end position, as well as their defense, of course. But from the offensive standpoint, I think Gerald Everett adds a new element for them. I mean, yes, he had some bad drops last year, but what's your take on him here with Justin Herbert and the Chargers?
Yeah, I mean, you're buying into the offense, and you're also buying into a profile with Everett that, despite the fact that he did get to play more last year with the Seahawks, he still was in a bit of a rotation with Will Disley, and then you just had the quarterback situation fall apart. But if you look at his underlying metrics, yards per route run, 1.25, 1.30, 1.65, 1.46, and last year 1.34. So like a 2 is elite. Is really good for receivers. It's an elite for tight end. But this range, like we've seen him pop that 1.65, be right around a 1.5 again. Like that's really good for tight end. That's the equivalent of good. A 2.0 for a receiver, a 1.50 for a tight end is they're kind of the same. And so I think he's shown enough. And then when you look at his targets per route run, again, it's a great stat to use on these players that have had to be more rotational up to this point in their career, because it just tells you what happens when they're on the field. So if we can assume a little more playing time for him, it helps. But his targets per route run, 19%, 22%, 21%, and then last year, 17%. So we've seen him get over that 20% threshold multiple times. So if all of a sudden he could get out there and be on the field for 70 to 80% of the routes, I think it's going to be really hard for Gerald Everett, to not show upside to be inside the top 12. But you can take him really as a high-end tight end too. And I think that's where he deserves to go. We're probably going to say for sure it's Keenan Allen 1, right? Then number 2 is Mike Williams, and then number 3 is Austin Eckler. So he's the number 4 in the offense, but it could be a really good offense, because you have Justin Herbert. So the quarterback helps things out. So I like him as that high-end tight end too.
Yeah, he's kind of going in the same area right now in drafts. FFWC, he's going in around 16 with Hayden Hurst, David Njoku, all in that same area. So I like it as well. You get a cheap stack there if you drafted Herbert without having to pay up for somebody like Keenan Allen if you chose to go running back, whatever it may be. But it allows you to get a piece of that offense, which is, an offense where I think could lead the NFL in passing yards this year. So I like the signing. I like the draft capital where he's been going at, and one of my targets.
And there's contingent value. Like, what if Keenan Allen goes down for 4 games? What if Mike Williams gets – I mean, look, it's rare that a whole offense stays healthy for a full season.
And Mike Williams is the only guy in the NFL who can land on his head and his ass in the same play. So
I mean, I'm thinking in those weeks where all of a sudden he could become the number 2 or 3 target in that offense, he he might have a couple of weeks in the season where he ends up as the one. So you're buying into the offense, and I think there's an underlying talent profile that you're buying into with Gerald Everett. Like Gerald Everett's underlying talent profile is way better than Dawson Knox. Like Dawson Knox happens to play with a great quarterback and an offense that throws the ball all the damn time and runs a ton of plays. And that's what carries Dawson Knox. For Gerald Everett, like his talent is what is even made him slightly viable. So if all of a sudden the situation changes due to factors that we can't control, luck, variance, he could be in a really good spot.
Evan Ingram joined Jacksonville 1 year, $9 million. Not the landing spot I was hoping for. I was actually hoping Buffalo. But what's your take on Evan Ingram in drafts?
I mean, it's fine if you want to take him at the end of a draft. Like Ingram, he flashed really big for us early on. He again, you just heard me talk about the yards per route run, 1.45, 1.83, 1.59, but then downward, 1.28 and 0.89. Now, he's still a young player, only going to be 28 years old this season. So, again, this is the other issue. Like, how many inside players do they have? Chenault plays inside. Christian Kirk plays inside. Evan Ingram plays inside out of the slot. They want to get Travis Etienne involved out of the backfield. It's like, oh, man, like how many mouths are there to feed in an offense that I'm just not excited about? And I think in the end of the day, that's what pushes all the guys in Jacksonville down for me. I'm like, They have like 5 guys, and I don't even like the offense. Like, what, if I'm going to take a swing, it's Etienne. Like, that's it.
We have Njoku. This one, okay. This one bothered me last year, and it bothers me even more now. But they signed Hooper last year, which just baffled me. I had no idea why they did it after they drafted Bryant as well. But they decide to franchise tag David Njoku this year. Talented, very talented tight end. I'm excited that Hooper's finally gone because we might actually see this talent develop finally. But we don't know who's throwing the ball in the early part of the year. Is it going to be Watson? Is it going to be, whoever else is going to be playing quarterback week 1? We don't know what's going to happen. What is David Njoku? Where's he going for you in your rankings, and what do you like in drafts for him?
Yeah, so I've got a tier of tight ends that really are kind of this, upside, tight end. So like Gerald Everett profile fits, David Njoku's profile fits. Really Noah Fant's profile, Irv Smith Jr. There's a lot of guys in this range. And I'm probably just going to try to get equal exposure across all of them, to be honest, because I don't want to hang my hat on any one of them. There aren't any of them that I'm just like, oh my God, like I have to have this one. Like, I think there's a story we could tell ourselves for and against all of these guys. For Njoku, the story for him, like if you want to be positive, you've already hit on most of it. Number one, he has shown to have that underlying explosive profile. But he's also a player that's going into year 6 and has never really put any kind of consistent season together that we could really get excited about. He's had a nice season, but he's never really had a great even what I would call a good fantasy season. He was tight end 9 in 2018. So that was nice. But otherwise, he's been outside the top 20 every single year. You mentioned Harrison Bryant. Like, they like to rotate tight ends. So as good as Austin Hooper leaving is, I still think there's a strong chance that between
and Bryant's not a chub. Like Bryant's good.
He's a 4th round pick. Yeah. And so last year or 2 years ago, when you had Austin Hooper out, there were 2 games that it was just David Njoku and Harrison Bryant. And Harrison Bryant ran more routes than in both games. Last year, there was 1 game like that, and Njoku had more routes than Harrison Bryant. So I think it could be a bit of a maddening situation. Then when you layer in what you're talking about, we could potentially be dealing with Jacoby Brisket, chopped brisket, Brissett, like for, not near as good as your nachos.
You're making me hungry now.
Yeah, I know. I get hungry looking at your pictures of nachos on Twitter. Those look fabulous. But no, look, it's a player that if Watson gets back sooner, I think that's really good for him because he could be as high as the number 2 in the offense. But I think it's still going to be a situation where it's going to be so up and down. It's probably going to be kind of maddening. So again, another player that I do like. I'd rather have most of my exposure on Njoku and best ball.
Okay, we have 4 more players on the list here. 1 more tight end.
We'll rapid fire. Sorry.
We'll rapid fire. Austin Hooper joins Titans here. 1 year, $6 million deal. What is your opinion on Hooper? Seems to be the Titans can never commit to a tight end. They always want to play 2 or 3. What's your take on Hooper, and are you comfortable drafting him?
It's just meh. He's had a couple of years where he kind of flashed a little bit in certain, metrics. He had 2 top 6 tight end finishes, in Atlanta. his last 2 seasons. But the problem is what you just mentioned. Like, can Tennessee commit to him? Really let him get enough routes being out there? Whenever the quarterback's dropping back to throw the ball, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see who else they add. For me, with him, I really do want to wait and see what they do with the rest of the roster. They brought back Jeff Swain. They have not brought back Ferkser to this point, as far as, at least I didn't check like late last week. So if they did, it's something that I missed. So for me with Hooper, I'm probably not going to draft hardly any of them.
Yeah, I'd agree. When I saw that to Tennessee, I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. Marcus Mariota, Falcons new starter, 2-year deal, $18.75 million. I'm a little intrigued here, but I do think that the Falcons will address during the draft as well. What's your take on Mariota and dress?
Yeah, Mariota is a guy that I'm not drafting him right now because I think his ADP will either stay the same or go down. Just because of what you said. They're going to either add a quarterback or they're not. If they do add a quarterback, his ADP is probably going to slip. And guess what? He's probably still going to be projected as the starter. But with Mariota, it gets a little trickier because you don't want a complete zero as your QB2 or even as your QB3 if you're going to draft him. So it's almost like I kind of like him better in redraft, which means I'm not going to draft him. I'm going to pick him up off the wire because most drafts, let's face it, he's not going to be picked in redraft. So he does have the upside with his legs, but he's never, honestly, for the profile he had coming out, he's never lived up to it. Like, what he does with his legs is nothing near like what we've seen with some of these other quarterbacks. And I know Lamar Jackson's like a really high bar, but even compared to like Deshaun Watson, a lot of these, Jalen Hurts, he's not done anything close to those guys like what we thought. And his team doesn't use him that way. They don't use him on design runs as much as those other guys have been used. And look, he's already been with Arthur Smith, before, and he got benched for Ryan Tannehill with Arthur Smith. So Arthur Smith wasn't the offensive coordinator then. He was the tight ends coach, I believe, still at that point. So not necessarily his call per se, but it's a player I like the rushing profile, even though it's not as good, as some of the other guys. I think it can be a bonus. But like you mentioned earlier, like, who's he throwing to? Kyle Pitts and Cordell Patterson? Like, it's just it's going to have to come where he's going to have to give us value through the legs. So he's just a guy that, for me, I don't really want him in best ball until I know they don't draft a rookie. I'm not going to take him in redraft, but there's a chance he's like on the waiver wire speed dial.
Mitch Trubisky signs 2-year deal with the Steelers here, $14.2 million. This signing I actually liked. I did not want to see them go out and try to do this Deshaun Watson madness that a lot of teams were, trying to get. I think it's a smart move for the Steelers. Go out and get a cheap contract, maybe draft a quarterback in this draft if someone slips to you. Trubisky had showed capable at times with Chicago. I'm going to chop it up to the Matt Nagy effect, kind of like the Adam Gase effect on multiple teams, hoping that that's what we're going to see here for Trubisky. I have been taking some stabs on him in drafts, not a lot, just some exposure when I'm stacking Pittsburgh or, that division for best ball. But what's your take on him this year in 2022? And what are your thoughts on him as a quarterback for one of your teams?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of hope for him as a real NFL quarterback. Like, his PFF passing grades have been 56.5, 63.6, 58.8. Not even going to count last year, really not enough plays, but it was a 53. So I don't know that at this point, look, it's possible. Still has first round draft capital, so teams are going to keep giving him a chance. That's the beauty of being a first round draft pick. It's like, you can suck and they're going to keep giving you a chance. But for fantasy, man, so this is the opposite for me, really, of Mariota. Like, I love the targets that he has. I get to throw to Claypool. I get to throw to Deontay Johnson.
Freiermuth.
Yeah, you get Pat Freiermuth. You got, Najee's fine out of the backfield, so I like that. He's actually just as much of a plus almost as Mariota on the ground. So yeah, I think from a fantasy perspective, like Trubisky, and again, we're going to have to see what happens with them in the draft as well.
Yep.
But if say one, they don't take a quarterback in the draft, I'll immediately start adding a lot more Trubisky to my profile. 2, they do add a quarterback, I'm probably just going to wait until like training camp because I don't think Mitch's ADP is going to change a lot anyway, and let's just see how it's sounding. Like, do we think he's going to keep the job or not? For sure, will be in play in redraft, especially as a waiver wire guy. But I probably will still go ahead and try to get some exposure to him in best ball if it really looks like he's going to win the job in camp. And the reason why is, like, I think there's a scenario you could play out where Mitchell Trubisky comes out and wins the job and plays good enough that the Steelers could actually be winning games. I mean, they have a roster. It's not an elite roster, but it's a good enough roster to be winning. The division is pretty tough. But I could see a scenario where Trubisky does get to hold on to the job for a complete year, especially given the fact that with this class, it's just, man, like I don't know that any of these guys are really ready. People are
there's maybe one. There's one
NFL
ready quarterback.
NFL ready, and then you'll hear some people say Ritter is the other one. But there's a good chance that none of these quarterbacks see starting time, and I think Mitch might be good enough to hold that off.
So the 2022 NFL futures for win totals have the Steelers at 7.5. Do you think Trubisky can get him over that mark?
I would still bet the under on that. It's not a line like I'm super enticed by.
Wow, first lost season for the Steelers, huh? Or for I'm blanking on his name right now. Oh my God, I'm sober too right now. Thank you, Tomlin.
Too. Man, you get so much stuff going in our heads. I know how it goes. And it's like afterward, like it'll come to me right away. I'm like, what in the world? Like, how did that? Like, how could that
first lost season for Tomlin. You're calling it, huh?
I would still bet the under. Yeah, I would. But again, like I would not be surprised if they won 9 or 10 games. I think they're going to try to manage things. I think, what you mentioned earlier with the Chiefs and what their offense could look like. I really do think you're going to see a little bit of a different style of offense with the Steelers this year. I think you're going to see a lot more under center. I think Trubisky can do some of the things that really they wanted to do in their offense last year that Ben couldn't do. And this is not saying he's better than Ben, but he can really
Ben was at that point in his career.
Yeah, he can operate under center. He can do a lot more of the bootleg, the play action stuff.
Yep.
Then you get the motion going using the receivers in the running game. You're using more, you're setting up players in open space via the scheme versus just setting a shotgun and just basically everybody go and just executing, which is really what Ben was most comfortable with. So I do think with Canada, we could see a layer of Trubisky's game unlocked, and I fully expect them to use his legs.
Last quarterback and last player of the day we're going to talk about is Jameis Winston, back to the Saints for 2 years, $28 million guaranteed. For me, this made me more interested in the passing game, that's for sure. I'm glad that the Kainami quarterback is Taysom Hill is finally, the experiment is over. I think a lot of us are finally glad it's over and we can get back to a passing offense here for the Saints. What do you think this offense is going to look like here without Sean Payton in 2022? And are you buying any of the pass catchers?
I think if you're going to buy into the pass catchers, it's really Michael Thomas. If you can get the right ADP on him, going to be 30, haven't seen him in a year and a half. So there's definitely questions, but what the upside could look like. He also, the type of routes and the types of the things that he does, where he wins is on the inside. A lot of matchups against linebackers, safeties, and zone. He's not going to have the accuracy that he had with Drew Brees. So that's going to hurt him with Jameis. Jameis will also throw a damn hospital ball, so get ready, Mike. But overall, I think I'm with you. I think that I don't love Jameis, but I think he could help sustain a guy like Mike Thomas.
Yeah.
Like we could see Thomas still get he could have 150 targets, and catch, 100 balls. Like it's in his range of outcomes. I'm not projecting Michael Thomas for 100 catches, but I think with Jameis, like it could work because I think it's really Thomas and it's Alvin Kamara. Like outside of that, like Traquan Smith, like we've seen enough Traquan Smith. Like
if you throw in the suspension that possibly could be looming for Alvin Kamara, that opens up the discussion of someone like Callaway for me in late drafts, like rounds 18, 19. I've been seeing him go in some drafts, if not undrafted at times. So there is some other pieces that have me interested. Like there's some speed on this offense as well. But I definitely think that Mike Thomas is really the only, I don't even call him safe because you're right. We haven't seen him in a year and a half, but he's going to be the safest bet of anybody on this offense to, have a 25 to 28% target share. Just no one else in this team is going to command that type of target share other than him.
Yeah. And I think the way the offense is going to look, I think with Dennis Allen running things, Sean Payton gone, and we already saw this last year, they realize that they're not stocked with all these weapons. So they're not trying to go out there and just have shootouts. Really, what they want to do is have Jameis manage the game. And I think you constantly have to coach that to Jameis. And he did make steps forward in those areas. But, man, his sack rate is way higher than Drew Brees. His interceptions per pass attempt for his career, obviously astronomical compared to Drew Brees. So I think they're still going to want to control those two components to Jameis's game. Taking a sack is almost as bad for your EPA as throwing a pick. So they're going to really probably try to avoid the sacks. They're going to want to avoid, getting into these shootouts, letting Jameis, throw interceptions and things like that. They're going to try to lean on their defense. And so I think you'll see a conservative shell offense, except when they get forced out of it. The thing is, like, they're going to get to play the Panthers twice, who don't look very good, right now. They're going to get to play Atlanta, who could be the worst team in the league, twice. So I think there's going to be some games where they can kind of stay in their shell and they won't have to do anything. And in those games, like, you'll see Jameis throw for 150 yards. He might throw for 2 touchdowns, but he won't throw the picks, right? He won't take the sacks, and you'll see the defense kind of come through for them. But then in the games where they have to get in a shootout, like when they played Tampa, and for whatever reason, they've kind of had Brady's number, but let's say in those games, then I feel a little more comfortable, with all the weapons on the Saints.
Well, as we wrap up, I want to remind people that we have live drafts going on daily over at the FFWC. That is going to be, powered by Full-Time Fantasy. We have live rookie drafts going right now. Not rookie drafts, sorry. Dynasty drafts that have just started up. We just started a $1,000 dynasty draft over there with some other high stakes players and analysts, but there is rooms for $150 dynasty leagues. There's another $1,000 dynasty league open right now, $500 dynasty leagues. And then we have leagues as low as $25 for best ball. So $25 best ball leagues, $50 best ball leagues. Those are all confined. So no tournaments. So top 3 get paid out in those best balls. $25 leagues, $150 for first place, $65 for second place, $35 for third. And the $50 best ball confined league is $300 for first, $125 for second, and $75 for third. I want to thank you, Dwain, for coming on. For those who do not follow Dwain, you can find him at Dwain McFarland. That's going to be DWAIN MCFARLAND. Dwain, it's been a pleasure, buddy. And I want to say thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me on. Always a blast. Hopefully we'll do it again before the season starts.
Definitely. For those tuning in, we'll be back Thursday with Jody for the Full-Time Fantasy Show, and we're going to pick up the NFC for NFL futures. We covered AFC last weekend. If you haven't seen that, going back, we covered every team through the AFC for their win totals for their bets over at the GK Sportsbook. Head on over, watch that show. There's a lot of lines we liked over there that we gave up some of our bets. I did a bet live on air because I liked the line so much. So let's make sure to get caught up on that one before we hit the NFC, and we'll see you all back here Thursday. Have a good night.
Nothing but time, use it to grind. They huff and they puppet, this bacon is mine. Stakes are all high, our stakes are so dry. As rare as they come, put it all on the line. Losing very doubtful, cause I'm winning every outcome.